3 hours after their first contact with the Zephyrians, the UES Discovery was in orbit around the alien planet. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the briefing room with his senior staff, studying the holographic display that showed the planet's surface. The image was not encouraging. "As you can see," Dr. Lisa Carter said, pointing to different areas on the display, "the Devourers have spread across most of the planet. The red areas show their highest concentrations. The blue areas are where the Zephyrians have their underground cities." Commander Ryan Hayes leaned forward in his chair. "The creatures seem to avoid the polar regions. Too cold for them, maybe?" "That's what I'm thinking," Lisa replied. "But look at this." She changed the display to show heat signatures. "The Devourers are warm-blooded like most Earth mammals. Their body temperature is actually very similar to a large Earth predator like a lion or tiger." Lieutenant Amy Foster raised her hand. "Dr. Carter, are you saying these things are basically just big animals?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Lisa answered with a smile. "The Zephyrians see them as supernatural monsters, but from what I can tell, they're just very large, very aggressive carnivores. They're probably not much different from the big cats or bears that our ancestors had to deal with." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Ryan, I want you to take a reconnaissance team down to the surface. We need to observe these creatures firsthand before we make any plans." "Sir, with respect," Ryan said, "the Zephyrians made it clear that nothing survives on the surface." "The Zephyrians aren't human," Jake replied calmly. "We've been hunting dangerous predators for thousands of years. I think we can handle a closer look." 2 hours later, Commander Hayes was suited up in full combat armor, checking his equipment one last time. With him were Sergeant Tony Rodriguez, a tough Marine from Texas who had hunted everything from alligators to wild boar back on Earth, and Corporal Beth Williams, a demolitions expert who grew up hunting deer in the mountains of Colorado. "Remember," Ryan said as they prepared to beam down, "we're just observing, no engagement unless absolutely necessary. We want to learn how these things behave." The three humans materialized in a clearing surrounded by the strange purple trees they had seen in the Zephyrian recordings. The air was thick and humid, with a smell like rotting vegetation mixed with something metallic. Strange sounds echoed from the forest around them. "Motion sensors are picking up movement about 200 meters to our north," Tony whispered into his comm unit. 3 large signatures moving slowly. "Let's take a look," Ryan decided. They moved carefully through the alien forest, using their training to stay quiet and hidden. The ground was spongy under their feet, covered in the glowing moss that seemed to be everywhere. They reached a ridge that looked down into a valley. What they saw there made them stop and stare. 3 Devourers were feeding on the carcass of some large animal. Up close, the creatures were even more impressive than the recordings had shown. They were indeed about 12 feet tall, with powerful muscles visible under their armored skin. "Look at the way they're eating," Beth whispered. "They're not just tearing into the meat. They're being selective about which parts they take first." Ryan watched through his binoculars as one of the Devourers used its claws to carefully separate different sections of the dead animal. "They're smart. Smarter than the Zephyrians realize, but watch their body language." The 3 humans observed the Devourers for over an hour. The creatures showed pack behavior similar to wolves or lions on Earth. There was clearly an alpha male who ate first, while the other 2 waited their turn. They communicated through growls and body movements that seemed to have specific meanings. "They're not monsters," Tony said quietly. "They're just really big predators doing what predators do." "Agreed," Ryan replied. "And like any predator, they'll have weaknesses we can exploit." Back on the Discovery, Dr. Carter was in her laboratory with Chief Petty Officer Dan Cooper, the ship's chief engineer. They were analyzing the biological samples that the reconnaissance team had collected from the planet's surface. "The atmospheric readings are interesting," Don said, looking at his scanner. "The air is safe to breathe, but it has a higher oxygen content than Earth. That might explain why these Devourers are so large." Lisa nodded as she studied tissue samples under her microscope. "Don, look at this. I managed to get some skin cells from a tree that one of the Devourers had marked with its claws." The cellular structure is completely normal for a carbon-based life form. What does that mean? Don asked. It means they're not some kind of supernatural creature like the Zephyrians think. They're made of the same basic materials as Earth animals: protein, fat, muscle tissue, bone structure. In fact, double quotes, Lisa paused and ran another scan. Done. This is fascinating. Their muscle tissue has an incredibly high protein content, much higher than Earth beef or chicken. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? Don asked with a grin. I'm thinking that these creatures might actually be quite nutritious, Lisa replied. Of course, we'd have to test for toxins and make sure the meat is safe to eat, but the basic composition looks very promising. Meanwhile, in the communications center, Lieutenant Amy Foster was working with Lieutenant Kevin Park to establish better contact with the Zephyrians. They had learned that the aliens could communicate in multiple frequencies, which allowed for much more detailed conversations. Ambassador Kethvar, Amy said into her headset, we've observed the Devourers and we believe we can help you. Impossible, came the musical reply. Many species have tried, all have failed. The Devourers cannot. He stopped. With respect, Ambassador, Kevin interjected, I don't think any of those species approach the problem the way humans would. What do you mean? Kethvar asked. Amy and Kevin looked at each other, both grinning. Well, sir, Amy said, most species seem to see the Devourers as unstoppable monsters. We see them as very large animals that happen to be dangerous. On Earth, we've been hunting dangerous animals for our entire history. But these creatures are apex predators, Kethvar protested. They fear nothing. They hunt everything. So, did the saber-toothed tigers on our world, Kevin replied. So did the cave bears and the dire wolves. We hunted them all. Most of them are extinct now. There was a long silence from the Zephyrian end of the communication. Finally, Kethvar spoke again. You were saying that your species hunts apex predators? We don't just hunt them, Amy said cheerfully. We eat them too. Some of the most expensive food on Earth comes from dangerous predators. Shark fin soup, for instance. Or fugu, which is a fish that can kill you if it's not prepared correctly. You eat creatures that can kill you? Kethvar's voice rose to a pitch that sounded almost panicked. Well, only after we kill them first, Kevin laughed. We're not crazy. Back in the briefing room, Captain Morrison was reviewing all the reports from his crew. The reconnaissance mission had provided valuable intelligence. Dr. Carter's biological analysis suggested the creatures were not only huntable but potentially edible. The communications team had learned more about Zephyrian psychology and why they were so terrified of what were essentially just large carnivores. So, here's what I'm thinking, Jake said to his assembled crew. These Devourers are dangerous, but they're not supernatural. They're animals. Big, smart, well-armed animals, but still just animals. We know how to deal with animals. What's the plan, Captain? Ryan asked. Jake smiled, the expression confident and slightly predatory. We're going to do what humans have always done with dangerous predators. We're going to hunt them, kill them, and eat them. And we're going to show the Zephyrians that their unstoppable monsters are really just another source of protein. Doctor. Carter raised her hand. Captain, I should mention that my analysis suggests Devourer meat would be extremely high in protein and essential amino acids. It might actually be quite delicious. Even better, Jake replied. Ryan, I want you to organize a hunting party. Lisa, start working on how to safely prepare and cook Devourer meat. Amy and Kevin, keep the Zephyrians informed of our plans. Sir, Amy said hesitantly, I'm not sure they're going to believe what we're planning to do. They will once they see us do it, Jake answered. After all, the best way to prove that a monster isn't really a monster is to turn it into dinner. The crew of the Discovery began preparing for something that had never been attempted in the known galaxy. They were going to treat the most feared predators in the sector like particularly large game animals, and they were going to do it with the calm efficiency that only humans could bring to the art of hunting. Master Chief Carlstone had been hunting dangerous animals his entire life. He grew up in Alaska, where he learned to track bears and wolves through thick forests. Later, he hunted lions in Africa and crocodiles in Australia. But as he stood on the surface of the Zephyrian planet, surrounded by his team of Marines, he felt the familiar excitement that came with facing a new challenge. "Remember, people," Carl said quietly into his comm unit, "these things are smart. They hunt in packs and they can set traps. But they're still animals. They follow patterns, and patterns can be predicted." With him were 4 of the Discovery's best Marines. Steve Clark was a sniper from Montana who could hit a target from a mile away. Maria Santos was a tracker from New Mexico who could follow a trail that was days old. Alan Davis was a demolitions expert from Georgia who knew how to set traps that could stop a charging elephant. And Beth Williams, who had been on the reconnaissance mission, was their specialist in alien biology. "Chief," Steve said, adjusting his rifle scope, "I've got movement about 300 meters north. Looks like a pack of 5 devourers moving through the purple trees." Carl raised his binoculars and studied the creatures. They were moving in a formation that reminded him of wolves hunting deer. 1 in front, 2 on the sides, and 2 bringing up the rear. Professional hunters, just like the predators back on Earth? "Maria, what do you think?" Carl asked. Maria was kneeling beside a tree, examining scratches in the bark. "They marked this tree recently, Schiff, probably within the last few hours. The scratches are deep, about 4 inches into the wood. These things have serious claws." "But look at the pattern," Beth added, running her scanner over the marks. "They're not random. Each scratch is exactly the same distance apart. They're marking territory just like big cats do on Earth." Carl nodded. This was good information. Territorial animals were predictable animals. "Alan, start setting up the trap. Steve, find a good position where you can cover the approach. Maria, I want you to track their patrol route." 20 meters away, behind a cluster of rocks, Chef Petty Officer Nina Bell was setting up her field kitchen. Nina had cooked in some strange places during her time in the service, but this was definitely the strangest. She was preparing to cook meat from a creature that most of the galaxy considered to be unstoppable death machines. "Dr. Carter," Nina said into her comm, "are you sure this meat is going to be safe to eat?" "Based on my analysis, it should be fine," Lisa's voice came back through the comm. "The protein structure is actually very similar to Earth beef, just with a much higher concentration. Think of it like very lean, very nutritious steak. What about the acid they spit?" Nina asked, checking her cooking equipment one more time. "The acid is produced in special glands near their mouths," Lisa explained. "As long as we avoid those areas and cook the meat properly, there should be no problem," Nina grinned. She had always prided herself on being able to cook anything, and this would definitely be a first. "Well, Doc, I've got the grill ready. All we need now is the meat." Back with the hunting team, Carl was studying the terrain through his binoculars. The Devourers had a den about half a mile away, in what looked like a cave system carved into a hillside. They seemed to patrol the area around their den in regular patterns, which was exactly what Carl had hoped for. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow valley between 2 ridges. "That's where we'll take them. It's a natural funnel. They'll have to come through there if they want to get back to their den." Alan nodded and began unpacking his equipment. "I can set shaped charges on both sides of the valley. When the creatures come through, we'll bring down enough rock to trap them in the middle. And I'll have a clear shot from the ridge," Steve added. Already moving toward his chosen position, Maria was still tracking, following the scratches and scent marks the Devourers had left behind. "Chief, they're definitely following a pattern. They patrol this area every 4 hours, always taking the same route. We've got about 2 hours before they come back this way." "Perfect," Carl said. "That gives us time to set up properly." Meanwhile, back on the Discovery, Ambassador Kethvar was in the communications center with Captain Morrison, watching the hunting preparations through the cameras on the Marine's armor. The alien's crystalline features showed complete bewilderment. "Captain Morrison," Kethvar said, his musical voice filled with confusion, "your people are treating the Devourers like common prey animals." "Do they not understand the danger?" Jake smiled calmly. Ambassador, my people have been hunting dangerous predators for thousands of years. We understand the danger perfectly. We just don't let it stop us. But these creatures have destroyed entire civilizations, Kethvar protested. They are apex predators without equal. So were the dinosaurs, Jake replied. My species has always found ways to deal with things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than we are. Usually, we do it by being smarter. On the planet's surface, the trap was almost ready. Alan had placed his charges carefully, positioning them so that when they exploded, they would create a rock slide that would block both ends of the valley. Steve was in position on the ridge with his rifle, and Maria had found a spot where she could watch the Devourer's approach route. Carl was checking his own weapon, a heavy rifle designed for hunting large game. The bullets were specially designed to penetrate thick hide and deliver maximum stopping power. He had used similar weapons to hunt rhinoceros and Cape buffalo on Earth. Chief, Maria's voice came through the cum. I've got them. 5 Devourers moving this way just like I predicted. They'll be in the valley in about 10 minutes. Everyone ready? Carl asked. He got confirmations from his entire team. Remember, we want the alpha male if possible. He'll be the largest. One probably in the lead. Nina, monitoring the conversation from her field kitchen, added, and try not to damage the good cuts too much. I'm planning something special for dinner tonight. The Devourers appeared at the mouth of the valley right on schedule. They moved with the confident grace of creatures that had never faced serious opposition. The alpha male was indeed impressive, standing a full 13 feet tall with scars across his armored hide that spoke of many battles. But beautiful animals, Carl murmured, watching them through his scope. Too bad they're so aggressive. The creatures moved into the valley, following the path they had used for years. They showed no sign of suspecting a trap. Why would they? Nothing on this planet had ever successfully hunted them before. When the Devourers were exactly in the center of the valley, Carl gave the signal. Now Alan triggered his charges. The explosions echoed across the landscape as tons of rock came crashing down, sealing both ends of the valley. The Devourers roared in surprise and fury, suddenly finding themselves trapped in a space barely 100 meters long. Steve, take the shot, Carl ordered. The sniper rifle cracked, and the alpha male staggered as the bullet struck him in the chest. The creature roared again, this time in pain, and began looking for an escape route. The other Devourers spread out, trying to find a way to climb the steep valley walls. Hit him again, Carl said calmly. These things are tough. Steve fired twice more, placing his shots precisely. The alpha male stumbled and fell, his roars growing weaker. The other Devourers rushed to attack the rocky barriers, their claws sending sparks as they struck stone. Maria, Beth, move in from the left. I'll take the right, Carl ordered. We need to finish this quickly before they find a way out. The battle was brief but intense. The Devourers fought with the desperation of trapped animals, but they were facing humans who had been hunting dangerous predators for millennia. Within 15 minutes, all 5 creatures lay still in the valley. Well, Carl said, looking at the massive carcasses, that was exciting. Nina, you've got your meat. Back on the Discovery, Ambassador Kethvar stared at the screen in absolute silence. The creatures that had terrorized his people for 50 years had been killed in less than 20 minutes by a handful of humans using simple hunting tactics. Captain Morrison, Kethvar finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, what will your people do with the bodies? Jake's smile was cheerful and completely human. Well, Ambassador, now comes the really interesting part. We're going to cook them and eat them. Would you like to join us for dinner? The alien's crystalline features went through several color changes before he managed to speak again. You want me to eat a devourer? Trust me, Jake said. Chef Bell is planning something special. I think you'll be surprised how good apex predator tastes when it's properly prepared. Down on the planet, Nina was already at work, her knives flashing as she expertly butchered the largest devourer. The meat was indeed lean and well marbled, exactly what she had hoped for. She hummed happily as she worked, already planning the seasoning and cooking methods she would use. "You know what, guys?" she called out to the hunting team. "I think this is going to be the best meal we've had in months." 2 hours after the successful hunt, the mess hall aboard the UES Discovery was filled with the most unusual aroma in the ship's history. Chef Nina Bell stood at her cooking station, a huge smile on her face as she prepared the first devourer. Steaks ever cooked by human hands. The meat sizzled on the grill, giving off a smell that was surprisingly pleasant. "It smells like a cross between beef and venison," Dr. Lisa Carter said, watching Nina work. "The protein analysis shows it's incredibly nutritious. Much better than any Earth meat I've ever tested." Lieutenant Ray Collins, the ship's food scientist, was taking careful notes as he observed the cooking process. "The fat content is perfect for grilling, not too lean, not too fatty. And look at that marbling, this is prime quality meat." Nina flipped the steaks with practiced skill. "You know what's funny? Back on Earth, we pay huge money for exotic meats. Lion, crocodile, shark. People love to eat dangerous animals. But this stuff is probably going to be the most expensive meat in the galaxy, and we're getting it for free." In the communications center, Ambassador Kethvar was watching the cooking preparations through the ship's internal cameras. His crystalline features kept changing colors, cycling through what the humans had learned were expressions of shock, confusion, and disbelief. "Captain Morrison," Kethvar said, his musical voice shaking, "your people are actually cooking the devourers. They are preparing to eat them." "That's right," Captain Jake Morrison replied cheerfully. "Nina's been planning this meal all day. She's really excited about trying a new type of meat." "But these creatures are apex predators," Kethvar protested. "They are death incarnate. How can your people treat them as food?" Jake sat down in his chair and leaned back comfortably. "Ambassador, let me tell you about my home planet. We have creatures called sharks. They're perfect killing machines that have existed for millions of years. They have rows of razor-sharp teeth and can smell blood from miles away. Some of them grow to be 20 feet long." "They sound terrifying," Kethvar whispered. "They are," Jake agreed, "but we make soup out of their fins. It's considered a delicacy. We also have bears that can weigh 800 pounds and run faster than our vehicles. We hunt them too, and snakes whose venom can kill in minutes." "We eat those as well." Kethvar was silent for a long moment. "Your species eats its predators? We eat everything, Ambassador. If it moves and has meat on it, someone on Earth has probably figured out how to cook it. The more dangerous the animal, the more we seem to enjoy eating it." Down in the mess hall, the first devourer steaks were ready. Nina had prepared them with simple seasoning, wanting to taste the natural flavor of the meat. She cut a piece and took the first bite, chewing thoughtfully. "Oh, wow," she said, her eyes lighting up. "This is incredible. It's like the best steak I've ever had, but with a unique flavor. Kind of nutty, with a hint of something I can't identify." Dr. Carter took a bite and nodded in agreement. "The texture is perfect, tender but with just enough firmness. And you're right about the flavor. It's unlike anything from Earth." Master Chief Carl Stone entered the mess hall with his hunting team. They were still in their field gear, tired, but satisfied with their successful hunt. "How's our prize, Chef?" Carl asked. "See for yourself," Nina said, handing him a plate with a perfectly cooked steak. Carl took a bite and grinned. "Outstanding. This is better than the elk I shot in Montana last year. Better than the kudu I had in Africa, too." Steve Clark, the sniper, tried his portion and whistled in appreciation. "Chief, we need to bag a few more of these. This is restaurant-quality meat." "Already planning the next hunt," Carl replied. "I spotted at least 3 more packs during our reconnaissance. We'll have enough meat to feed the crew for weeks." In her laboratory, Dr. Carter was analyzing the nutritional content of the cooked meat. "Captain, you need to see this," she called over the com. "This meat isn't just delicious. It's incredibly healthy. High protein, low fat, and it contains amino acids that are rare in Earth foods." "What does that mean?" Jake asked. "It means eating devourer meat could actually be better for us than most Earth foods. It's like someone designed the perfect protein source. Back in the communications center, Kethvar was struggling to process what he was witnessing. Captain Morrison, I must ask, is this normal behavior for your species? Do you always eat your enemies? Jake laughed. Well, we don't usually eat our intelligent enemies. That would be rude. But dangerous animals? Absolutely. In fact, some of our most prized foods come from the most dangerous creatures on our planet. I do not understand, Kethvar said. How can you be so calm about consuming apex predators? It's simple, Jake explained. On Earth, humans are the apex predators. Everything else is either food or potential food, even the things that can kill us. Lieutenant Amy Foster joined the conversation. Ambassador, let me give you another example. We have fish called pufferfish that are so poisonous they can kill you if prepared incorrectly. But we still eat them because they taste good. Trained chefs spend years learning how to prepare them safely. You eat poisonous creatures? Kethvar's voice rose several octaves. The more dangerous it is, the more we seem to like eating it. Amy replied with a grin. In the mess hall, word of the successful Devoured feast was spreading throughout the ship. Crew members who had been skeptical about eating alien apex predators were lining up to try the meat. The response was universally positive. This is better than anything we get from the food synthesizers, said engineer Don Cooper, finishing his second helping. I vote we hunt more of these things, added communications officer Kevin Park. This could revolutionize food service in the fleet. Nina was already planning her next menu. I'm thinking devour steaks with grilled vegetables for tomorrow. Maybe some kind of sauce made from local herbs. Oh, and I want to try slow cooking some of the tougher cuts. I bet they'd make an excellent stew. Dr. Carter was taking detailed notes on everyone's reactions to the meat. No negative side effects so far? Everyone reports feeling satisfied and energetic. The protein absorption rate is excellent. Lieutenant Ray Collins was working on preserving some of the meat for later analysis. Captain, we should consider this a major discovery. Devourer meat could become a significant trade commodity. Other species might pay enormous amounts for access to such high-quality protein. Assuming we can convince them to eat something they're terrified of, Jake replied, back in the communications center. Ambassador Kethvar was watching the human feast in stunned silence. The crew of the Discovery was not just eating the devourers. They were enjoying it. They were laughing and talking and asking for second helpings of creatures that had terrorized the Zephyrian people for half a century. Captain Morrison, Kethvar finally said, I think I'm beginning to understand why no other species has been able to help us. Oh, why is that? Because no other species thinks like humans do. We see monsters. You see dinner? We see unstoppable predators. You see high-quality meat, Jake nodded. That's probably true, Ambassador. Humans have a unique relationship with danger. We don't just face it or flee from it, we eat it. But how? Kethvar asked. How did your species develop this attitude? Dr. Carter spoke up from her station. Ambassador, humans evolved as both predators and prey. We've always had to compete with dangerous animals for food and territory. Over millions of years, we learned that the best way to deal with a dangerous predator is to make it not dangerous anymore. By killing it and eating it? Jake added. But surely some creatures on your world were too dangerous to hunt? Kethvar asked. There were some, Jake admitted. Large dinosaurs, for example. But those went extinct long before humans became advanced hunters. By the time we developed tools and weapons, there wasn't much on Earth that we couldn't handle. Nina called out from the kitchen area. Captain, we've got enough meat for everyone to have seconds. And I'm already planning tomorrow's menu. I think Devourer burgers might be interesting. The human crew cheered at the announcement. Many of them were already finishing their first helpings and looking forward to more. Kethvar watched this celebration in amazement. Captain Morrison, your people have turned our greatest nightmare into a festive meal. That's humanity for you, Ambassador, Jake replied with a smile. We have a talent for turning problems into opportunities. And apparently you're apex predator. Problem is also a high-quality protein opportunity. As the feast continued, Kethvar began to understand that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans didn't just defeat dangerous predators. They domesticated them, in a sense, by transforming them from sources of terror into sources of nourishment. It was a perspective so alien to Zephrien thinking that it bordered on the incomprehensible, and yet it worked. 6 months after the first Devourer hunt, the planet that had once been known throughout the galaxy as a death world was now being called something very different. The humans had named it Hunter's Paradise, and ships from across the sector were arriving to see the impossible transformation. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed space station orbiting the planet. Through the windows he could see the green forests that had replaced the twisted purple trees. The Zephyrians had emerged from their underground cities and were rebuilding their civilization on the surface for the first time in 50 years. "Captain," Lieutenant Amy Foster said, approaching with a datapad, "we have 3 more requests for hunting expeditions this week. The Altarian Trade Federation wants to book a guided hunt for their diplomatic corps. Apparently, they heard about Admiral Young's visit last month." Jake smiled, remembering the Admiral's reaction when she had tasted her first Devourer steak. "What about the restaurant situation?" "Chef Bell's restaurant is booked solid for the next 4 months," Amy replied. "She's had to hire 12 additional cooks just to keep up with demand. The apex predator Wellington is apparently the most requested dish in 3 star systems." Down on the planet's surface, Nina Bell was indeed busy. Her restaurant, called The Predator's Table, had become the most famous dining establishment in the sector. The building was constructed in the heart of what had once been the most dangerous Devourer territory, and diners could watch hunting expeditions through large windows while they ate. "Order up," Nania called from her kitchen. 2 apex predator Wellingtons, 1 Devourer steak medium rare, and 1 hunter's stew. Her sous chef, Gary White, carried the plates to a table where 4 alien dignitaries were waiting nervously. They were from the Centauri Council, a species that had never eaten meat from a predator more dangerous than a fish. "Are you certain this is safe?" asked the lead dignitary, a tall blue-skinned being with 4 arms. "Completely safe," Gary assured him. "We've served over 10,000 meals without a single problem. The meat is thoroughly tested and perfectly prepared." At another table, Ambassador Kethvar was dining with a group of his own people. The Zephyrians had slowly overcome their terror of Devourer meat and had discovered that they actually enjoyed the taste. Kethvar had become something of an expert on human cooking methods. "The secret," he was explaining to his companions, "is in the seasoning. Humans have discovered that Devourer meat pairs excellently with their earth spices. The garlic and rosemary combination is particularly effective." Outside the restaurant, Master Chief Carl Stone was leading another hunting expedition. The demand for Devourer hunts had grown so much that the humans had established a permanent hunting lodge and training facility. Carl now spent his days teaching other species how to hunt the creatures that had once terrorized them. "Remember," he was telling a group of young Zephyrian volunteers, "these animals are dangerous, but they're predictable. They follow patterns. Watch their body language, understand their territory markers, and always hunt in teams." The Zephyrians nodded eagerly. A year ago, they would have considered Carl's words insane. Now they were competing with each other for spots in his hunting classes. "Chief Stone," asked one of the students, "is it true that humans hunted creatures like this on your home planet?" "Even bigger ones," Carl replied with a grin. "We hunted mammoths that were twice the size of Devourers. The trick is using your brain instead of trying to overpower them." Meanwhile, Dr. Lisa Carter was in her expanded laboratory complex, working with Lieutenant Ray Collins on a project that would have seemed impossible a year ago. They were developing sustainable devourer farming techniques. "The breeding program is showing excellent results," Lisa reported to Captain Morrison over the com. "We've successfully raised devourers in controlled environments. They're less aggressive when they're not competing for territory, and the meat quality is actually better than wild specimens." "Farming apex predators," Jake mused. "Only humans would think of that." "The economics are incredible," Ray added. Devoured meat is selling for 50 times the price of Earth beef. One successful farm could support an entire colony. The transformation hadn't just affected the Zephyrian planet. Word of humanity's unique solution to the Devoured problem had spread throughout the galaxy, and other species were beginning to request help with their own predator problems. Admiral Patricia Young was in the command center, reviewing requests from across known space. Jake, we've got the vegan empire asking for help with something called shadow stalkers on their outer rim worlds. The description sounds like they're basically giant space wolves. What about the Helix Consortium? Jake asked. They want us to deal with creatures called void hunters that have been attacking their mining operations. Apparently, there's some kind of armored space whale that feeds on starship metal. Jake laughed. Space whales? That sounds like it could make interesting sushi. In the diplomatic quarters of the space station, representatives from dozens of species were meeting to discuss what was being called the human solution to apex predator problems. The meeting was led by Ambassador Kethvar, who had become something of an expert on human psychology. The key to understanding humans, he was explaining to the assembled delegates, is realizing that they don't see any creature as truly unstoppable. To them, every predator is just a different type of hunting challenge. A representative from the Andromedan Collective raised a tentacle. But surely there must be limits to what they will hunt and eat. I have yet to find any, Kethvar replied. I have observed them consuming creatures that breathe fire, animals that can turn invisible, and predators that can phase through solid matter. Each time, they simply adapt their hunting techniques and develop new cooking methods. Back at the restaurant, Nina was experimenting with a new dish. She had acquired meat from a creature called a crystal mantis from the Sigma Draconis system. The creature was supposedly impossible to kill because its body was made of living diamond. The trick, she explained to her staff, is slow cooking at very high temperatures. The diamond shell actually adds a unique mineral flavor to the meat underneath. Lucy Brown, one of her servers, shook her head in amazement. Nina, 6 months ago you were cooking normal Earth food. Now you're preparing meals from creatures that supposedly can't be killed. That's the beauty of working with humans, Nina replied cheerfully. There's always a new challenge. And every impossible creature just means a new item for the menu. The impact of the human approach was being felt across the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear of apex predators for thousands of years were beginning to see them differently. The Krogan Empire, known for their military might, had requested human hunting instructors. The Scifistories Federation was asking for help establishing predator farms, but perhaps the most significant change was happening right on the Zephyrian homeworld. The species that had once lived in underground bunkers was now expanding across their planet's surface. Cities were being built in areas that had been devoured territory for decades. Captain Morrison, Kethvar said during one of their regular communications, my people are transforming. We are no longer afraid. We are learning to hunt, to cook, to see danger as opportunity. That's the idea, Jake replied. Fear keeps you trapped. But once you realize that every monster is just another animal, you become free to deal with it. As the months passed, the UES Discovery had become the flagship of a new fleet. Ships named the Hunter, the Apex, and the Predator now patrolled the galaxy, responding to calls for help from species plagued by dangerous creatures. The humans had discovered their new role in the galactic community. They weren't just explorers or diplomats or traders. They were the species that other civilizations called when the monsters needed to be turned into meals, and business was very, very good. In her restaurant, Nina looked out at the dining room, filled with beings from dozens of different worlds, all enjoying meals made from creatures that had once been considered unstoppable. At one table, a group of military officers from the Terran Defense Force were celebrating a successful hunt. At another, a family of Zephyrian children was trying Devoured nuggets for the first time. You know what I love about this job? Nina said to Gary as they watched their customers. What's that? Every day, someone brings me a new, impossible creature to cook. And every day I prove that there's no such thing as impossible, there's just not cooked properly yet. Outside, the sun was setting over a world that had been transformed by the simple human belief that every predator was just another meal waiting to happen. And across the galaxy, other worlds were learning the same lesson, one perfectly seasoned apex predator at a time. 2 years after the first Devourer hunt, Captain Jake Morrison found himself in a situation he had never expected. He was sitting in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council, listening to representatives from hundreds of worlds argue about something called the Human Predator Protocol. The humans have completely changed how we think about dangerous creatures, declared Senator Vextor from the Rigel Commonwealth. Their methods have solved predator problems that plagued our worlds for centuries. At what cost? Countered Ambassador Zeta-9 from the Machine Intelligence Collective. They have turned apex predators into a commercial industry. They profit from creatures that should be respected as forces of nature. Jake listened to the debate with amusement. The Galactic Council had called this emergency session because human hunting operations had become so successful that they were affecting the balance of power across known space. Worlds that had been considered uninhabitable were now thriving colonies. Species that had lived in fear were becoming confident hunters themselves. Admiral Patricia Young, who was sitting beside Jake, leaned over and whispered, "Remember when our biggest problem was figuring out what to do with alien apex predators? Now apparently we're too good at it." The session was interrupted when a new delegation entered the hall. They were the hegemony of worlds, the most powerful military alliance in the galaxy. Their leader, War Marshal Kronvac, was a massive being, covered in natural armor, who commanded fleets that could destroy star systems. "Honored delegates," Kronvac announced in a voice like grinding metal, "the hegemony wishes to make a formal request. We need human assistance with a creature problem that threatens our entire civilization." The hall fell silent. The hegemony had never asked anyone for help with anything. They were the species that other civilizations called when they needed military protection. "What kind of creatures?" Jake asked, standing up. "We call them Star Devourers," Kronvac replied. "They are beasts the size of battleships that feed on the energy cores of our space stations. They appear from deep space, consume our installations, and disappear. Our most powerful weapons cannot harm them." Jake exchanged glances with Admiral Young. "How many of these creatures are there?" "Hundreds, possibly thousands. They have destroyed 17 of our major installations in the past year. We face complete economic collapse if they are not stopped." Dr. Lisa Carter, who was attending the council session as Earth's scientific representative, raised her hand. "War Marshal, have you considered that these creatures might simply be very large space-dwelling animals looking for food?" Kronvac's armored features shifted in what might have been confusion. "They are forces of destruction. They cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with." "Most animals can't be reasoned with either," Lisa replied cheerfully. "But they can usually be hunted, studied, and if they're not sentient, probably eaten." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. The idea of hunting creatures the size of spaceships seemed impossible to most of the delegates. But the humans in the room were already discussing the logistics. "We'll need bigger ships," Admiral Young said thoughtfully, "and probably some new types of weapons, but it sounds like an interesting challenge." "You would actually attempt to hunt these beasts?" Kronvac asked. "War Marshal," Jake said with a smile, "my species once hunted whales that were 100 feet long using small wooden boats and hand-thrown spears. Hunting space whales with starships sounds like a reasonable upgrade." 3 months later, the UES Leviathan, humanity's largest hunting vessel, was approaching the edge of hegemony space. The ship had been specially designed for hunting massive, space-dwelling creatures. It carried weapons that could penetrate thick hides, nets that could hold creatures the size of buildings, and most importantly, the largest mobile kitchen ever built. Chef Nina Bell had been promoted to head of exotic cuisine for the Galactic Hunting Guild. the organization that humans had established to coordinate their predator management services. She was now aboard the Leviathan with a team of 20 cooks, all eager to tackle their biggest culinary challenge yet. According to the data from the hegemony, Nine said to her team, these Star Devourers are basically giant space jellyfish. They feed on energy, but they're still organic creatures. That means they're probably edible. Her assistant chef, Sam Miller, looked at the holographic display showing a Star Devourer. The creature was indeed massive, with a translucent body that pulsed with internal light and tentacles that stretched for miles. Chef, Sam said nervously, how exactly do you cook something that's the size of a city? Very carefully, Nina replied with a grin. And probably in sections. On the bridge, Captain Jake Morrison was working with Master Chief Carl Stone to plan their hunting strategy. Carl had been promoted to Director of Galactic Hunting Operations and now oversaw hunting teams on 17 different worlds. The key is understanding their behavior, Carl explained to the mixed crew of humans and aliens aboard the ship. According to the hegemony's data, these creatures follow predictable migration patterns. They move from energy source to energy source, feeding and then moving on. Lieutenant Commander Susan Price, the ship's new tactical officer, studied the sensor readings. If they're following energy signatures, we could use that to lure them into a trap. Exactly what I was thinking, Carl agreed. We set up a fake energy source, wait for one to approach, then take it down with the new harpoon cannons. The plan seemed simple enough, but when the first Star Devourer appeared on their sensors, the crew realized they were dealing with something unprecedented. The creature was beautiful in a terrifying way, its body shimmering with colors that had no names. It moved through space with the grace of a dancing ribbon, but its size made every movement seem slow and deliberate. Target approaching the bait, reported Kevin Park, who had been promoted to Chief Sensor Operator. Distance, 50,000 kilometers and closing. All stations ready, Jake ordered. Remember, we want to disable it, not destroy it. Nina has plans for dinner. The Star Devourer reached the fake energy source and began to feed. Its massive tentacles wrapped around the decoy station, and its body pulsed brighter as it absorbed the artificial energy. Now, Jake commanded. The Leviathan's new weapons fired simultaneously. Massive harpoons, each one the size of a small spacecraft, shot toward the creature. The harpoons were connected to the ship by cables strong enough to hold a moon in orbit. The Star Devourer writhed in surprise as the harpoon struck its body. Its tentacles lashed out, creating waves of energy that made the ship's shields flare with light. But the creature couldn't escape. The humans had it trapped. Beginning harvest operations, announced Chief Engineer Beth Martinez, who now oversaw. The specialized equipment needed to process creatures of this size. The next phase of the operation was unlike anything that had ever been attempted. The Leviathan deployed massive cutting tools that could slice through the Star Devourer's hide. Processing drones swarmed over the creature's body, collecting samples and beginning the enormous task of butchering a creature the size of a space station. Nina supervised the operation from her command kitchen, watching as tons of Star Devourer meat were brought aboard the ship. The meat glowed with the same inner light as the living creature, and it smelled like ozone and starlight. This is incredible, she said, examining a sample under her scanner. The meat contains concentrated stellar energy. It's like the creature converts starlight into protein. Dr. Carter, who was aboard the ship as the expedition's scientific advisor, was equally excited. Nina, this could be the most nutritious food source ever discovered. The energy content alone is off the charts. The processing operation took 18 hours. When it was finished, the Leviathan's cargo holds were filled with enough Star Devourer meat to feed a planet for a year. But more importantly, they had proven that even creatures the size of spacecraft could be successfully hunted by humans. War Marshal Kronvac, Jake said during the victory celebration, your Star Devourer problem is solved. We can establish regular hunting patrols to keep their numbers manageable. The hegemony leader, who was attending the celebration via hologram, seemed stunned. You have accomplished in days what our entire military could not achieve in years. That's The difference between fighting a monster and hunting an animal, Carl explained. Monsters seem unstoppable. Animals have weaknesses you can exploit. The success of the Star Devourer hunt sent shockwaves across the galaxy. If humans could hunt creatures the size of battleships, there was literally no predator that couldn't be turned into a meal. Species that had given up entire star systems to dangerous creatures began sending requests for human assistance. The Galactic Hunting Guild established permanent bases in 12 systems. Nina opened a chain of restaurants called Apex Dining, serving exotic predator meat to customers across known space. Master Chief Stone founded the Predator Academy, teaching hunting techniques to species that had never considered fighting back against dangerous creatures, but perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed Earth and humanity. Humans were no longer seen as newcomers to galactic civilization. They were the species you called when the impossible needed to be made possible.